Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. We've been extensively covering the avalanche of BS a year and several months before the election that Cornel West, who is not even officially the Green Party candidate, will spoil or steal the election from Joe Biden and hand it to Donald Trump. It's been coming from the usual suspects, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, Politico. But this latest piece from Newsweek really takes the cake because it actually argues against itself. Headline: Cornel West's presidential run could cost Biden election in these states. Okay, seems like a pretty specific headline. Presumably, they'll offer us battleground states with historical data that would indicate Cornel West is going to peel off X amount of votes from Joe Biden that could cost him the election. Let's go on. West's campaign has already drawn comparisons to Green Party candidate Jill Stein, who ran against former President Donald Trump and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in 2016 and gained more votes in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania than Trump's margin of victory. Nonetheless, there is no way to be sure how Stein's voters would have cast their ballot if she hadn't run. Okay, so they bring up that Jill Stein potentially stole the election from Hillary Clinton, but then add the caveat: there's no way to actually know for sure how they would have voted if Jill Stein wasn't on the ballot. Actually, there is. They could have included polls and surveys that surveyed Jill Stein voters, and the majority of Jill Stein voters said, yeah, no, if Jill Stein wasn't on the ballot, we just wouldn't have voted. We wouldn't have voted for Hillary Clinton. But I digress. Let's continue. An Echelon Insights poll of 1,020 voters from June 26th to 29th about a hypothetical matchup between Trump, Biden, and West showed that voters narrowly preferred Trump over Biden. West had 4% of the vote in the general election, while the poll showed Trump and Biden receiving 43% and 42% respectively. Newsweek has reached out to Biden and West's campaign via email for comment. Quote, the likely margins between a Biden versus Trump rematch are so thin that any legitimate third-party candidate could prove decisive. Thomas Gift, founding director of the Center on U.S. Politics at the University College London in the UK, told Newsweek earlier this month. Your go-to quote is academic from London about U.S. politics. Okay. Winning without an R or a D beside your name might be impossible, but that doesn't mean a third-party candidate couldn't determine the next president simply by cannibalizing votes, Gift said. In a close 2024 election, West could play, I think they meant, spoiler, and potentially siphon votes from Biden in crucial swing states. Here are the states where West could affect the outcome. Okay, so again, headline: Cornel West presidential run could cost Biden election in these states. I'm ready for specifics because we're about 5 or 6 paragraphs down and I don't have any. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin were key to Trump's 2016 victory and Biden's 2020 victory. In December 2016, Dave Wasserman, U.S. House editor of the Cook Political Report, pointed out that Stein won more votes in each of these states than Trump's margin of victory. In Michigan, Stein won 51,463 votes, while Trump's winning margin was just 10,704. In Pennsylvania, Stein won 49,941. Trump's margin there was 44,292. And in Wisconsin, Stein won 31,072 votes, and Trump's margin of victory was 22,748. Quote, Jill Stein is now officially the Ralph Nader of 2016, Wasserman tweeted at the time, referring to the third-party presidential candidate who ran in the 2000 election and has often been blamed for former Vice President Al Gore's loss to former President George W. Bush. However, there is no way to know at this stage how voters in those 3 crucial states will cast their ballots in November next year, or if West will perform at the same level as Stein. Wait a minute. Headline of the story says Cornel West's presidential run could cost Biden election in these states. I don't know. It seems pretty specific. I'm assuming from the headline we're going to get some data, some stats, something other than a quote from some academic in the United Kingdom about U.S. politics, a tweet from a political pollster, Dave Wasserman, who does a good job in real time announcing elections, but overall, is not the god of politics. But we basically get a quote from Dave Wasserman saying Jill Stein is now officially the Ralph Nader of 2016 in reference to her margin of victory. Excuse me, Jill Stein's margin of votes exceeding Donald Trump's margin of victory in those key states. And then the kicker, however, there's no way to know at this stage how voters in those crucial states will cast their ballots in November next year, or if West will perform at the same level as Stein. So then why are you writing the article? The article says Cornel West presidential run could cost Biden election in these states. You reference Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and you provide no supporting information that indicates Cornel West is going to peel enough votes away from Biden in these states. Not a one. Then he goes on to talk about Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada, and the case is even weaker, pointing out that in 2016, Jill Stein got less votes in those states than she did in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. In Arizona, Trump's margin of victory was 91,234, while Stein won just 34,000, and her impact on the Georgia race was negligible. So what is the point of this story other than the continued propaganda and false narrative to create a meltdown effect and try and dissuade potentially persuadable voters from considering that scary threat to democracy that is Cornel West? It makes no sense. Of course, they could have added into this piece the actual information, credit to Vox, of all places, that actually put out some information and data years ago. This piece was, did Jill Stein voters deliver Donald Trump the presidency? Well, they actually provide information showing no, they didn't. They reference an analysis that was done. The final totals revealed that, in fact, Stein's total voters exceeded Clinton's margin of victory. In other words, if every Stein voter had voted for Clinton instead, she could have won Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and the presidency. Time to blame those idealistic third-party voters. Not quite. Obviously, not all Stein and Johnson voters were disaffected Democrats. Some would have voted for Trump, written-in candidates, or not voted at all. This is very different from Florida in 2000, where only a small fraction of Florida voters for Nader, about 0.5%, would have needed to vote Gore to give Gore the election. And that's what exit polling that asked people how they would have voted in a two-party race, with the third option of not voting finds. Under that scenario, she would have won Michigan, she meaning Hillary Clinton, she would have won Michigan, still lost Florida, and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania would have been 48 to 48% toss-up. Clinton would have needed to win both of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania to reach 270 electoral votes. So even in the artificial world of that exit poll that erased Stein and Johnson, Clinton seemed likely to lose. One tweak, it's not that she was likely to lose, she would have lost, because again, she would have tied in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. If you tie, you don't get those electoral votes. Trump still wins. So there is information out there for Newsweek and all these other propaganda outlets to show Hillary Clinton would have lost in a two-way contest to Jill Stein. A two-way contest between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. None of these outlets want to mention that pesky little fact. She spent more time in the month of August 2016, right when the general election was starting, fundraising and hobnobbing in the Hamptons with wealthy people trying to fundraise, while Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, was hauling ass around the country doing 2 or 3 rallies a day. She didn't campaign in Wisconsin near the end. She pulled her volunteers out of Michigan preemptively, thinking she had it in the bag. None of that is mentioned. She wasn't the spoiler against herself. It was those damn Jill Stein voters who surveyed, said, yeah, we would have just not voted. We weren't going to vote for Hillary Clinton. It's absurd. So I did something, I don't know, kind of radical these days for journalism. I reached out to that Newsweek author. I don't know, the reporter. I no idea. But I was actually pretty curious, like, what's the point of writing this story that does not at all, the actual story does not support your headline? Let's take a look. Good morning, Dara. This is independent journalist Jordan Chariton with Status Coup News. I was reading your piece from yesterday, headline Cornel West presidential run could cost Biden elections in these states. I expected to find some specifics on what factors data suggests that West would pull away significant enough votes from President Biden to cost him the states you selected, but there were no specifics provided. In the case of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, you cite Jill Stein's vote total in 2016 exceeding Trump's margin of victory, while providing no data or supporting information that showed that Stein's voters would have in fact voted for Clinton if Stein had not been in the race. The only information provided is tweets from Dave Wasserman's calling Jill Stein the Ralph Nader of 2016, who he also never provided any supporting info to show Stein voters would have voted for Hillary at big enough numbers to make a difference. As Vox News reported, even without Stein in the race, Clinton would have still lost. Ultimately, you concede, quote, however, there is no way to know at this stage how voters in those three crucial states will cast their ballots in November next year, or if West will perform at the same level as Stein. Respectfully, it seems like you headlined your story to imply West was going to cost Biden these critical states, despite your story providing no reporting to support that. In fairness, you're not the only reporter outlet who has done this in recent weeks, but I figured I'd reach out to get your response. Do you have any data or reporting that supports Cornel West potentially costing Biden Michigan, Wisconsin, or Pennsylvania in 2024? Sent that about 45 minutes ago. I'm not expecting a response, but I figured, you know what? Why not? She's got, he or she, I don't know the gender. That reporter has, a microphone at Newsweek, is going to reach a whole lot of people. And that's the goal. Let's just put out the headline, because we know the overwhelming majority of people in this ADD generation are going to look at the headline, if you're lucky, a paragraph or two, and then move on their way. Propaganda implemented in their brains. It's just absurd. Absolutely absurd. And honestly, to me, it's not even about whether you support Cornel West or not, whether you support a third-party candidate or not, whether you choose to vote, whether you don't. It's not my role to tell you who to vote for. Do whatever you want. But it is about, we talk about election interference and the corporate media's hysteria over years about Russia and the Facebook ads and the trolls, yada, yada, yada. What has a bigger effect in actual election interference than the 24/7 billion-dollar industry that is corporate media lies and propaganda that hoodwink people into thinking you are threatening democracy, you are emboldening fascism by having options, having a third-party option, when data shows they are not stealing the election from the Democrat. That is the real election interference. It's the corporate media machine. As we have outlined over and over and over again, Ralph Nader didn't steal the election from Al Gore. The Supreme Court did. Al Gore won the election. And he also lost Tennessee, his home state. Blame Al Gore. Jill Stein did not steal the election from Hillary Clinton. We've explained it over and over again. The data doesn't support it. Hillary Clinton was a terrible candidate. And there's no evidence to indicate that whether it's 1%, 2%, 5%, 10%, that the overwhelming majority of Cornel West voters would vote for Joe Biden if not for Cornel West. Based on my reporting around the country and just covering the progressive movement, I would strongly suspect the overwhelming majority of Cornel West voters just won't vote if he's not an option instead of voting for Joe Biden.